Take a moment to look at this graph. What you're looking at should scare you. This is the new reality of American coastlines, and, for that matter, the world's coastlines. Compiled by the New York Times, these two series of data points show the drastic coastal encroachment in American cities. Miami, Boston, Annapolis, and Charleston. Each set reveals a trend in the rise of sea level combined with increased sunny day or nuisance flooding, all of which is currently happening as we speak. And these high tide floods will continue to get worse. These graphs show that sea level rise is not just a problem for the future. It's here already and is affecting communities globally and locally. Which means that today, we're going to unpack sea level not as an amorphous indicator of future apocalyptic doom, but as a real problem that is beginning to impact American cities along the coast. According to NASA, the sea's level has risen over 7 inches in the past 100 years as a result of two factors: melting of land ice at the poles and the expansion of the ocean as it heats up. Now, 7 inches may not seem drastic, but according to oceanographer John Englander, it's more substantial than it seems.
But the ratio is surprising. For each foot of rise, the average global shoreline moves inland about 300 feet, the length of a football field.
With more greenhouse gases in the air than in human history, global temperatures will inevitably begin to rise, and with it, sea level. But really, why is this important to know now? In order to answer that, we need to return to those graphs to get a sense of what sea level looks like on the ground level. At its core, the data shows the increased presence of nuisance flooding in coastal cities, which in this case is the city of Annapolis in Maryland. Nuisance floods, also known as sunny day floods or high tide flooding, are the result of higher sea levels combined with a high tide. In other words, because the sea level has increased over the last 100 years, it no longer takes a storm to breach protective city barriers. Instead, merely high tide can be enough to push water onto roads and flood neighborhoods. Take, for example, Miami. In Miami, as the tide begins to rise, water is pushed up through storm drains and back onto the streets, which on a sunny day can be a bit concerning for citizens. And this is not only happening along Miami's shore, it's also happening inland in low-income neighborhoods.
It's going to devalue the home eventually.
Yeah.
If people are going to come by and see it, then there's no interest in buying a property like that. You're surrounded by stinky water.
So for many, these floods are no longer just a nuisance, but pose a very real threat to their homes and livelihoods. Recognizing that these floods are happening across the country's coastlines is important because it's one of the first tangible markers of a changing climate, which means that how we react to the problem of tidal flooding might help set the tone for navigating the growing list of consequences of climate change. Miami's mayor is by no means turning a blind eye to the water on the streets, but like many coastal cities around the U.S., often the issue is tied up in ideological gridlock.
And the difficulty we're having is convincing the governor and the Secretary of Transportation that they need to fix their roads. But unfortunately, we have an administration in Tallahassee that doesn't believe in sea level rise.
So despite the very real consequences of sea level rise like road closures and flooded homes, an effort to quell and mitigate the growing tide is lackluster at best. There are solutions to tidal flooding and a growing ocean. But in Miami, most of these look like 30 to 40-year patches, which lean heavily on the hope that innovation will be the savior of coastal property owners. So when we consider the challenges of a rising sea level, we should look towards the solutions of countries like the Netherlands, which has dealt with the consequences of flooding since it was first settled. The Netherlands is considered a leader in climate change hydrology because they are offering and implementing a holistic vision for living with, rather than against, rising tides. As the New York Times puts it, many of the Dutch view climate change not as a problem, but as an opportunity. Their solutions to climate adaptations seek to build richer communities in a stronger, healthier country. This means foregoing larger seawalls and instead creating public parks that double as flood zones to allow rivers room to flow. In a sense, giving the water a place to go and simultaneously providing more recreational space for its citizens. The point is this: sea level rise is very real and affecting cities in the United States and abroad right now by way of tidal floods. But there are solutions that are being enacted in places like the Netherlands that might help both mitigate the damages of increased water level and build more resilient communities. Thanks so much for watching. If you're feeling generous today or just like watching my videos, consider supporting this channel on Patreon, where you can pledge $1 or more for every video I release. This goes a long way to helping me make better videos on environmental issues. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.